Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending where you're joining from. It's great to welcome you to today's webinar titled The New ROI, How Energy Efficiency Measures Can Accelerate Scope 3 Decarbonization. I'm Mark Seagull, the founder and CEO of ESG Today, and I'll be guiding us through the session. Like Scope 3 decarbonization is something we've been writing about for years, and it seems like we're writing about it more and more, certainly, top of mind for sustainability managers and companies everywhere. So for that, I'm really happy to be joined today by Schneider Electric's Rohan, Shah and Carmen Adamson. I'll invite them to quickly introduce themselves in just a moment. Before we go on, just a quick housekeeping note. We hope to have some time for Q&A on today's webinar. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comment section, and we'll get to as many of them as we can if there's time. So let's get right into it. First, let's set the stage. Scope 3 emissions are now one of the most urgent priorities for business leaders. They represent the majority of a company's carbon footprint, and yet they are the hardest to influence because they sit outside direct operational control. At the same time, pressure from regulators, investors, and customers on companies is growing, and companies are being asked to act faster and smarter. And the challenge is, how do you deliver near-term ROI while also enabling long-term transformation across the supply chain? And that's exactly what we plan to explore on today's webinar. So before we dive in, Rohan, let me just hand it over to you for a quick introduction, and we'll hear from Carmen as well.
Yep, thanks, Mark. So Rohan Shah, based out of London. I've been with Schneider Electric for about 4 years now, and really focusing around everything to do with energy management, energy optimization, and then more of those transformational energy projects into electrification, low carbon fuel sources, and so tying all of that into a strategy that helps not only sort of businesses look at their scope 1 and scope 2, but then venturing out into the scope 3 side of things as well.
My name is, sorry, go ahead. I'm Carmen, like Mark said. I have been with Schneider for about 3 years now. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, in one of our hubs, and I am a marketing communications manager in our programs that we manage on behalf of clients. So I help clients with their communications when they have supply chain programs.
Okay, great. So now that we've had a chance to meet you guys, let's jump into the discussion. Rohan, why don't you start us off? And if you can, maybe share why energy efficiency is such a critical lever for Scope 3 decarbonization.
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Mark. So Scope 3 decarbonization is often one of the most complex parts of any net zero journey. While Scope 1 and Scope 2 can be managed sort of within own operations, Scope 3 stretches out to that entire value chain, as you mentioned. So it relies on thousands of suppliers, each with different levels of maturity, capacity to invest, willingness to engage. And while some are already down that journey and they're able to sort of show that they can, or into the decarbonization journey, the ones who need the most support are usually the least advanced ones. And this is because they've got a lack of in-house expertise, constrained on cost pressures, remain sort of tied to their legacy systems, oversized, outdated, and built with reliability in mind rather than an efficiency or sustainability. So that natural step that one would want to take is with regards to energy efficiency, and that's why it becomes that critical lever. It gives suppliers a way in through two major benefits. So the first is it right-sizes the challenge. When you look at decarbonization, it can seem like a very big topic. People generally think that it's right, we need to transform your business model, or you need to spend millions on shiny new technologies. At the end of the day, it's about making most of what you already have and only replacing what's truly necessary. So simple measures are what we tend to first say are the best steps forward, adjusting set points, automating controls, tackling that problem of waste in the process or operations, and those can cut down emissions already and energy usage by 15 to 20%. And then these projects sort of allow for that bigger benefit down the line to make those bigger transformational investments, which at the moment don't seem very achievable, but as we go through these different stages, they tend to make that challenge a lot more right-sized. If you take electrification as an example, the upfront cost of a new boiler looks daunting when you start sizing it up in today's demand, but if you start taking those steps of energy efficiency, reducing that demand, those numbers look very different. 600 to 700 megawatt hour boiler is going to be far cheaper than one sized up at about 1,000 megawatt hours in both equipment, in grid connection, but then also in operating costs down the line. And the second one is it sort of builds that foundation for the future. Today, there's a strong momentum, obviously, on switching to renewable electricity. And this is a critical step from an electricity standpoint. But a lot of industries do still use that mix of fossil fuel-based and electricity-based operations. And so renewable electricity only covers a portion of that problem. Efficiency changes that because, as I said, it creates the starting point for being able to reduce the demand at source. And leaning on that previous point, it sort of allows for those fossil fuel-based consumptions to be reduced, converting such operations to electric-based. And then when coupled with that renewable electricity side of things, that is what delivers decarbonized ecosystem as a whole. And to add on to this, it just means that companies will also use far less than currently needed today, which makes the entire system, or the energy system rather, leaner, cleaner, and more resilient. So just with all of that put together, essentially Scope 3 doesn't, and efficiency more specifically, shouldn't be treated as a side note. It's more of an entry point, an enabler, an accelerator. So it helps suppliers take that first step, make investments more viable, and ensures that what is being delivered as real decarbonization is sort of seen through. Back over to you, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Rohan. I mean, that's a really clear view of why energy efficiency can be such a powerful driver for suppliers to strategically tackle the concept of operational decarbonization on their sites. So, let's bring this to life with some practical ways that show how our audience can tackle supply chain decarbonization. Maybe I'll turn to Carmen to start. What's the first step for businesses when it comes to engaging their supply base?
Yeah, as Rohan mentioned, there's a lot of suppliers that are early in their journey. Maybe they don't have that climate maturity. And from our experience managing supply chain programs on behalf of 40 plus brands, we see the most success when companies know their why, have a targeting strategy, and then emphasize collaboration. So coming to know your why, this is leading by example. What are your internal proof points? If you can curate your own story, tell suppliers about how efficiency optimization lowers energy usage, and as Rohan mentioned, produces a real ROI from reducing costs and reducing emissions. That's going to be the foundation of your communication with suppliers and supplier engagement. This is our foundation at Schneider Electric. I know a lot of you on the call have probably seen that Schneider has been recognized as one of the most sustainable brands in the world. So when a company can lead with transparency and show how taking action, this will build trust with your suppliers and create a path to that open conversation. And then second, coming to that supplier targeting strategy, if you can understand where your supplier emissions are coming from, which suppliers are contributing most to your carbon footprint, what data you already have on your supplier emissions, and what data is missing. This is going to help prioritize your supplier segmentation and engagement strategy and set the stage for those meaningful conversations. This all comes back to a fundamental role of communication, just knowing your audience. It's going to help you create alignment by linking supplier action to shared goals, finding those mutual benefits. Our clients are offering tools, education, and resources for their suppliers to overcome those typical barriers to entry, like Rohan mentioned, from limited expertise. And then Rohan, maybe you can share some more on some quick wins that I know you're seeing with clients that are really making the case for efficiency as a catalyst.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's spot on with regards to the biggest wins do often come from the simplest of actions. And those are exactly what help those suppliers see value quickly, which then builds on that credibility to move forward, and it gives them that confidence to move forward. And it's mainly because they're tangible, measurable sort of returns and results, which allow to move forward with that. So for example, simple of things such as tackling idle energy, equipment that stays on when it's not needed to, introducing better controls or scheduling can reduce that consumption without changing core operations at all. Improving data visibility itself can be a catalyst as well. You know where you're utilizing your energy, you know how you're utilizing it to then be able to make real impactful
I think Rohan's dropped there for a second. Hang on. Hey, Rohan, can you hear us?
Even simple things like optimizing your heating and cooling systems can cut those energies immediately with very short payback times. And these are kind of the sort of changes that don't require a huge amount of investment or long lead times, but they can build that confidence to sort of start seeing the savings straight away. And essentially all of that put
Oh no.
Hang on.
together individually might seem small, but they change mindsets. That energy efficiency and
Hang on.
decarbonization
1
as a
second,
whole is
Rohan.
not.
Can you hear me okay?
Hello?
Yeah, Rohan? I hope you can hear me. Hey, Rohan, your video is a little bit in and out. So let me just give you a minute to see if you can get online here, and if you can, maybe just rewind for about a minute because it was a bit spotty for a minute. Seem a little bit stuck here. All right, let's give him a minute to try to sign back on. Here we go. Hang on. Hi, Rohan. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, loud and clear. Apologies.
Okay.
Internet
Yeah, so you
just
just
completely
dropped
dropped
off
out.
there about a minute ago. So you think if you could just rewind maybe a minute or so and
Sure.
catch up.
Apologies for that.
Yeah, you
I'll
start back at the top of your example that you were giving, Ron.
yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. So for those on online, apologies. Biggest wins tend to come from the smallest of actions, right? And so these are exactly what help the suppliers see that value quickly, and that's what those tangible and measurable immediate results and returns tend to build that confidence within the business to then move forward onto the larger projects. So simple things such as optimizing heating and cooling systems, setting those set points correctly, those in itself can cut energy use immediately with very short payback times. These are the kind of changes that don't require huge investment or lead times, but they do build that confidence with those savings that are visible straight away. Another powerful quick win is tackling idle energy, for example. So equipment that stays on when it doesn't need to, simple introductions of, again, better controls and scheduling can reduce that consumption and sort of change the core of the, without changing core of the operations completely. And finally, data improvement, data visibility, that in itself can be a catalyst. And once again, it is a very quick win that can come into play where you start tackling energy use in real time by understanding where you're utilizing it and how you're utilizing it to then spark further action to see where the waste is happening and then sort of put that all into practice. So these might sound small individually, but together they can sort of change that mindset. And when I mean mindset, I mean when you look at decarbonization as a whole, it's not about sacrificing, but rather smartly using those resources, laying the technical groundwork, which is where this energy efficiency piece becomes a real critical lever to then invest into those larger transformational projects. And suddenly it's not a question of if it makes sense, but rather what comes next and how you can stagger those projects in order for it to be both financially economical, technically economical as well. But obviously that looks at it sort of within the walls of the strategy and of the site in itself. I think, Carmen, we can sort of touch a little bit more around how this can strategically be scaled up and prioritized by combining sort of different concepts that drive larger transformation.
Yeah. So the Zero Carbon Project team and the team that I'm on at Schneider Electric, where we manage programs on behalf of clients, we're also members of the Scope 3 peer group. And this group has a lot of good resources and examples of how companies are tackling this. And from their latest 2025 review, the #1 challenge that reported was supplier engagement and capability building. So that's good to know, just so you know you're not alone in this. There's a lot of resources and examples out there. And when we think about scaling decarbonization across the supply chain, I'm going to pick up on something that Rohan said about improving data visibility as a catalyst. That visibility can go towards building your supplier targeting strategy. And we see our customers doing this to transform supply chain decarbonization at scale. That's going to help with visible data is going to lead into better communication and awareness And we see success in our clients doing that when they combine that with one platform, a digital tool to ingest this data, have the analytics and reporting, and that's going to provide improved focus and prioritization for your supplier targeting. When you think about the supplier segmentation, you want to look at risk and readiness to enable a targeted approach, benchmarking your suppliers to accelerate collaboration across the value chain. Going back to that report that I mentioned earlier, there's 78% of people that reported using a digital tool to enable supplier engagement, collaboration, and engaging suppliers based on strategic importance. And then the last thing that our clients are really doing to help scale impact is using a digital tool to provide access to education to their suppliers. So it's very clear, like Rohan was saying, there are suppliers that are going to lack capacity or maturity. So when you can give them a tool that helps them with education topics based on their maturity, that's going to lead to clear paths for them to take on how they can move forward, whether that's getting started with their emissions, getting started setting targets, or actually taking action and implementing energy efficiency projects. So our digital tool that we use that our clients are using has different pathways that suppliers can take based on what's going to be important for them, whether that's energy efficiency or helping suppliers accelerate with renewable electricity adoption. And then Rohan, I know you have a couple more examples of how our clients are doing that for energy efficiency projects.
Yeah, definitely. So again, I think having that platform and from a controls perspective, leveraging those platforms is always key. Because it just opens up suppliers, and again, leaning onto the data platforms themselves or onto the supply chain platforms. Not a lot of suppliers, and especially the smaller scale ones, will have access to a large range of different providers, if I can put it that way, for various projects. And so this way, it just allows them, it opens those doors by being able to get access to those, and B, also learn from others through different forums and things like that. And so that communication piece, that educational piece, and that understanding or that visibility and the sort of approach to it always gains momentum, and that's what sort of gains that confidence.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's like, such a fascinating discussion, and like so topical for our audience. It's amazing. So, those examples, really showed how energy efficiency and supplier engagement and adapted energy related measures are so critical for building momentum for supply chain decarbonization. So, just to be like super practical for our audience, if you want to leave them with like 3 actions they could take to jumpstart supply chain decarbonization, what would they be? I'll throw that out to either of you. To start with Rohan, I guess.
Yeah, look, supplier engagement, I think that's the first thing. Focus on the right suppliers, understand exactly who those suppliers are, who are the ones that contribute the most to your carbon footprint. Those are the ones, and who have you got a good relation with, actually, because those are the ones that are going to be engaged with you, and that you can engage with them to then sort of tailor those solutions to address their specific challenges and capabilities. And they're the ones who would want to build that partnership with you. If you go to a supplier that is sort of changing every year or 2 years, as we've seen, that engagement level is not quite there, rather than a supplier who's been with you for a number of years and who is going to stay with you for a number of years. That always sort of helps from that perspective. The second is from an efficiency as a catalyst perspective, we've got to be, or you guys have got to be able to sort of educate them from that perspective and use that efficiency as a starting point, reduce that energy demand, and that's going to generate sort of those immediate costs, benefits, those immediate savings benefits, and create the foundations for what makes sort of larger decarbonization of investments more practical, more achievable, and it's going to build that confidence internally. So that's the second point. And then the third one is obviously when you're scaling transformation, leveraging those digital tools, data insights, giving them access to those educational platforms, giving them access to providers, and being able to understand exactly how they can make that impact by them making those decisions, but with the support in the background across the entire supplier base, that sort of ensures that long-term measurable impact and that continuous improvement side of things.
Okay, great. I mean, thank you guys for those insights. So just bringing it all together, from what I can tell, the key takeaway today is that energy efficiency gains, they do more than cut emissions and reduce costs, but they really provide the fuel to accelerate supply chain decarbonization programs. With businesses under increasing pressure to make progress on Scope 3, it sounds like this approach can be a real game changer. Create momentum, freeing up resources, help organizations move faster, and faster and further in their decarbonization journey. So I mean that's all. That's everything I had prepared. But I think we have time for a quick Q&A if you guys are up to it. And we've got some really interesting questions that have come in the last few minutes. So okay, so let me throw it out. First, this actually fits, I think, exactly with what we were discussing. Especially we were focusing a lot on energy efficiency and the quick wins. But so the question is, if energy efficiency is the first step, how do you keep momentum going so suppliers don't just stop at the quick wins?
Yeah, I think it comes, and again, Carmen, I'll let you sort of fill in where you think is correct. But I think the key element with regards to that is keeping that momentum going, and the engagement that you've got with your suppliers is what will keep that momentum going. So if they sort of stop at that first piece, they're going to be able to cover X amount, and they're going to sort of start gaining that momentum and that confidence. But they still won't be able to reach that target, right? We're saying that energy efficiency is an enabler, and it's sort of that starting point to be able to action the larger transformational projects. But it doesn't mean that it's sort of it doesn't cover it off, or it doesn't replace it. Rather, sorry, that was the word I was looking for. So that's sort of where at least I can see that there's a lot of value is through the engagement that you've got with your suppliers and that continuous long-term engagement. And again, it comes back to my point around picking the right suppliers, because if you've got the right supplier base, the ones that have got that long-term partnership with you, and I think they'll be able to sort of see the long-term vision on it as well.
Yeah, and it comes back to linking that supplier action to the shared goal. So, reducing emissions through energy efficiency projects are going to help reduce that supplier's Scope 1 emissions. If you also have a goal for your suppliers to reduce their Scope 2 emissions, that can be the next journey that you push them towards, whether it's the energy efficiency projects or tackling Scope 2 emissions through renewable electricity. There are tools and technologies out there that are readily available for suppliers to take on both of those two scopes, which obviously leads to your Scope 3 emissions. So kind of looking at that plan overall with your supplier, do they have a climate plan? Are you asking them to set SBTi targets? Do they have targets already? If they have those targets already, you can look up that public information that's provided through SBTi, and you have all this information about your suppliers in that data tool, and that visibility is going to help you have that clear path for each of your suppliers. And so you can keep going with that momentum, kind of like checking little boxes along the way. The same thing that you would do yourself, you're kind of checking along the way for your supplier as well. And it sounds like a lot, but it can be done with those digital tools that we see our clients adopting.
Okay, great. So just staying on the topic of supplier engagement. I know, Carmen, you said that's like the number one issue, like you mentioned that comes up. So our next question, I think, is just bullseye on that question. How do you get smaller or less advanced suppliers on board when they don't have the same kind of budget or expertise as the bigger guys?
Yeah, we see our clients taking this into consideration when they're developing their programs. And a lot of the clients that I work with are offering that education to their suppliers at no cost. So they're providing that education for their suppliers. There's different education journeys that are tailored to the supplier by market based on their maturity level. So again, going back to that data that they maybe already have on their suppliers, that feeds into what education is going to be important for them. Maybe they need to start all the way at the beginning, just what are emissions? How do I calculate this? And so they're providing that education to their suppliers. They're not just telling their suppliers, hey, you need to do this. They're empowering them and collaborating with them on that journey.
Okay, and shifting from so like smaller suppliers to a similar type of issue, we got a question like, what do you think developing countries can do to catch up with the rest of the world when it comes to Scope 3 decarbonization as a concern? So suppliers, outside of the developed world, like how would you approach that?
Maybe
I think that's a great question, and it is something that we're tackling at the moment with one of our clients and sort of broadening out into their supply chain decarbonization strategy. And I think it's about once again, some of these within developing countries, some of these technologies may not be readily available, but there's still actions that they can take forward in sort of build up to those sort of elements. But on the other side, there are a lot of different challenges that also come into play. So at least from what we've understood and from what we've learned, it's about taking the knowledge base that we've got and the knowledge and the sort of general educational piece of the developing world and trying to integrate that into the developed and integrate that into the developing world from that perspective. And I think taking those steps and being able to take bite-sized chunks out of it will make it less daunting and will sort of allow for that development process to come through.
Okay, so here's actually a great question. There's a lot of great questions here. So any tips on handling suppliers that see decarbonization as a cost rather than an opportunity?
Yeah, I think that comes back to showing the ROI in your own story. So we talked about your internal proof points. There's a lot of building the business case type stats that you can gather as well. We've done this as a project to help our clients in their communication to their suppliers. So your own kind of story of, increasing your energy efficiency is going to reduce your energy usage, which can help you save costs. So there's a true ROI there. So those are those easy, quick wins. But then in the long term, there's lots of stats on how having a sustainability strategy reduces your risk as an organization. Climate change is a real risk in the world, and so having these other kind of building a business case type stats or information of how that's going to overall increase the company's value if you are more sustainable can also help kind of guide that conversation as well.
Okay, great. So we're getting pretty close to the end of time, but there's still a bunch of questions. I don't think we can get to all of them, but you guys okay if we do a couple more? Because I think these are great.
Definitely. Let's go for it.
Great. Okay, where do you see I mean, we touched on some of this, but where do you usually see the biggest efficiency opportunities in supply chains? That's a very broad question, but
so when obviously when we're speaking of efficiencies at the moment, we're speaking of on-site operational sort of that energy efficiency side of things, or at least from the whole decarbonization side of things, and that is purely around mainly, at least from experience, that we've got controls and automation, being able to understand and sort of really drill down on controlling your equipment correctly. That, at least from what I've seen so far in the 3-4 years and beyond of being in the business, is being able to really drive that energy reduction down. I don't know, Carmen, if you want to touch on a point of the wider sort of strategy piece around seeing an efficiency from that perspective.
I don't have anything to add to that actually. I mostly touch on the strategic communications that you can have with your suppliers.
Okay. So fine. So let me just do this one more. We'll sort of end with like some with how companies start. For companies just starting out, what's the first data point or metric to focus on Scope 3 decarbonization? I'll throw that to either of you guys.
Go for it, Carmen.
Yeah. So the first data point, I talked a little bit about just where your emissions coming from. So maybe that's spend data. Maybe that's asking suppliers for their emissions data if if your suppliers have that and they're willing to give that to you, they might not have it. So that's where, okay, my supplier doesn't even have emissions data, and you can start putting them in different groups of who has emissions data, who doesn't. I think there's a survey and some examples from the Scope 3 peer group on what are all the questions that companies ask in their supplier emissions survey. So you can kind of look through some of those resources, but it's going to come back to, can you get that emissions data from your suppliers, and what data do your suppliers have or don't have? And then that'll help you go from there.
Okay, great. We have a few more questions. I think we'll cut it off because we could probably go all day with the questions. So it's just about time to wrap up. But before we do, I'll throw it back to you guys just for any final thoughts on what we learned today.
I mean, I just want to make a comment on the questions that are coming through, and I think it's great to see that sort of engagement that's there with regards to the topic. It's really good to see all these questions coming down. In terms of final thought, I think if there's one message to sort of convey to suppliers, it's the cleanest energy is obviously the one that you don't consume, and this leads to both developing, low maturity, high maturity sort of suppliers, everything in between, where you don't need to wait for those big shiny solutions. There are quick wins that can be put into place, and those are the catalysts. It's the first step to make that decarbonization more tangible, more achievable, more measurable, both from a financial perspective and from an operation perspective.
Yeah, and then my final thought would just be focusing on collaboration. How can you empower suppliers? Do you have an opportunity to provide support, that capacity building, or education? And if there's any other questions that we didn't get to, I know there's a couple in here. We can follow up with everyone after this call.
Okay, great. So I guess that brings us to the end of the session. That was like so insightful, and I mean, I love doing these webinars because I feel like I learn a lot more in like a half hour than I do in 3 months of writing. So this is this has been really great. So again, thank you again, Rohan and Carmen, and to everyone joining. We'll send out a link to everybody who joined today with a recording of today's webinar, which will also be available shortly on the resources page on ESG Today. So you can take a look at it there. Anyway, so thanks everyone. I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.